Montana Territory, July 1878. The wind howled through the broken windows of the old church as Prescott Callahan pushed open the heavy door, his boots crunching over the shattered glass and fallen roof tiles. The storm had passed, but the sky still wore its bruises, clouds hanging low like they were not done with the land just yet. He had been tracking a stray calf, but what he found inside stopped him cold. She was curled beneath the altar, thin as windblown paper, her dress torn and dirty, her face streaked with dried blood and dust. Her arms stayed tight around her knees, like if she let go she might fall apart for good. Prescott stepped forward slow, his hat in his hand, his voice low and steady. "You hurt?" he asked, not taking another step. She looked up, eyes wide and wild, but not empty. There was something in them, fear, yes, but also fight, like she had held on through more than she should have. "I am not dead," she said, voice hoarse. "So I guess not bad enough." Prescott crouched, keeping his distance. "Name's Prescott Callahan. I do not mean you harm." He gestured toward the open doorway where his horse waited. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Willa Vance." "Well, Willa Vance, you need help. Let me get you out of here." She shook her head, sharp. "No, I ain't asking you to trust me. Just offering a hand." He reached out, palm up. Willa stared at it like it was a snake, not a gesture. But then her eyes shifted past him, to the sky, to whatever she had run from. Her shoulders dropped. She took his hand. Her skin was cold, her grip weak. He wrapped his coat around her without a word and led her outside, lifting her gently into the saddle before swinging up behind her. He kept one arm tied around her waist as he turned the horse toward his ranch. Prescott did not ask questions on the ride back. Willa did not offer answers, but she leaned back against him once they cleared the creek bed, and he took that for what it was, a beginning. The Callahan ranch sat low in the hills, a stretch of rough earth and solid fences. Prescott had built it himself after the war, piece by piece. Now it was quiet, just him and the cattle, and the ghosts he did not talk about. Inside the house, he set Willa down on the settee near the hearth and stoked the fire. She watched every move, her eyes tracking him like she expected something to snap. "I will heat water," he said gently. "You can clean up. There is stew, nothing fancy, but it is hot." She nodded, her voice gone again. Prescott gave her space, left a clean shirt and trousers folded by the door. When she finally stepped into the kitchen, her face was scrubbed, her hair damp, tied back with a leather cord. She looked young, but not soft. "Thank you," she said, sitting stiffly in the chair. "You are welcome." He set the bowl of stew in front of her, then sat across the table, his arms folded. "You got someone looking for you?" She shook her head. "No one left." Prescott nodded once. "You can stay here. I got plenty of room." Willa's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you need it. And because I can." She stared at him a long time, then took a slow bite of stew. "I ran from a man down in Billings. He hurt folks. Killed, too." Prescott's jaw tightened. "I do not plan to go back," Willa said. "You will not," he said, simple and firm. Over the next days, Willa slept more than she spoke. Prescott kept to his routines, feeding the horses, running fence, checking the north pasture. Sometimes she sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, just watching the land. Sometimes she helped, quiet but capable. One morning, she was in the barn, brushing down his mare like it was the only thing in the world worth doing. Prescott leaned on the doorway. "You ride." Willa looked over her shoulder. "Used to. Then you ought to again." She blinked at that. "Why do you care what I do?" Prescott stepped forward. "You are not some stray I picked up. You are a woman who survived something real bad. And you are here now. That matters." Her voice caught. "I do not know how to be anyone anymore. You start with today. That is all any of us get." Their rhythm grew steady. Willa took to the ranch work like she had been born to it, roping, riding, branding. She never complained, even when the sun beat down. Prescott found himself looking for her in the quiet moments, hearing her laugh when she thought no one was listening. One night, after supper, she stood by the fire and touched the edge of the old fiddle hanging on the wall. "You play?" he asked. "Not in years." "Try it." Her fingers curled around the neck, and she drew the bow slow. The first notes were shaky. Then they found their shape, soft and sure. Prescott watched her eyes close, her body sway just slightly with the tune. When she finished, the room was hushed. "You ought to play every night," he said. Willa smiled, small, but real. "Maybe I will." A month passed, then another. Willa grew stronger, her cheeks less hollow, her voice less guarded. Prescott kept noticing things: how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how she bit her lip when she was focused. He never said anything, but it built in him, quiet and steady. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sky burn orange over the hills. "Feels like home," Willa said. Prescott turned to her. "It can be." She looked at him, eyes searching. "You mean that?" "I do." Her hand found his. This time, it was her offering. Prescott closed his fingers around hers, and neither pulled away. Not anymore. The air carried a different weight in late August, full of grass seed and sun-warmed dust, thick enough to taste. Willa stood at the edge of the west paddock, her hands resting on the top rail, watching the heifers shift and huff in the heat. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and sweat traced the curve of her neck, but she didn't move to wipe it away. Behind her, Prescott tightened the cinch on a saddle, his motions slow and deliberate. "You've been quiet all morning," he said without looking up. Willa didn't turn. "I had a dream last night. About my brother." Prescott paused, one hand on the latigo. "You've not mentioned him before." "He was younger. Named Eli. Got sick just after my 16th birthday. Doctor from Bozeman said it was the lungs. Nothing to be done." She picked up a twig and turned it between her fingers. "I used to play fiddle for him when he couldn't sleep." Prescott finished with the saddle and stepped around the gelding, brushing a hand along its flank. "You play real fine." A flicker crossed her face. "It was his fiddle. Took it when I left." Prescott didn't press. He knew the shape of grief, how it settled in the bones, and never quite left. He waited, hands resting on his hips, until she glanced back toward him. "I want to ride today," she said. He nodded. "I'll get the bay ready." They rode north, toward the river cut. The land there was less worked, the grass taller, fields scattered with wild sage and sunflowers. Willa kept ahead, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Prescott let her lead. At the bend near the cottonwoods, she reined in. "I remember this place." "You been here before?" "Once. Years back. My father brought us this way when we moved west. Camped just beyond those trees." Prescott dismounted and tied his horse to a low branch. Willa followed suit, and they walked along the stream bank, boots sinking into soft earth. She crouched by the water, dipped her hand in. "I used to think Montana was a place you could disappear into," she said. "Like it could take what hurt and bury it under enough sky." "Maybe it can," Prescott said. "Or maybe it just gives you room to carry it better." Willa looked at him then. Really looked. "Why haven't you asked what I did before I ran?" Prescott's brow furrowed. "Because it don't matter more than what you do now." She straightened. "I stitched wounds at the brothel. Helped women who got too hurt to work. I never sold myself, but that didn't stop folks from assuming. I stayed because I didn't have anywhere else to go." He didn't flinch. "You saved lives. That counts." She studied his face, as if weighing whether to believe him. "The man who ran it, he found out I was hiding a girl. 14. I helped her get out. He beat me near blind. I left the next night." "You did right," Prescott said. "I did what I had to. That's what right is, sometimes." They sat by the water until the sun shifted low. Neither spoke again until the shadows stretched long and cool. Back at the ranch, Willa lit a lamp while Prescott washed up at the pump. The scent of hot iron and pine soap drifted in as he came through the door. "I was thinking," she said, placing 2 tin cups on the table. "Maybe I could build a coop. Chickens would do good here." His brow lifted. "You want to stay long enough to raise chickens?" She met his eyes. "I think I do." Prescott didn't answer right away. He walked to the cupboard, poured water into each cup, and passed one to her. "You build it. I'll help you fence it in," he said. Willa took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "Deal." That night, she laid her fiddle across her lap and played a tune Prescott didn't know, low and aching but not sorrowful. When he reached out at the final note, resting his palm gently over hers, she didn't pull away. She just looked at him and said, "You don't look at me like I'm broken. You're not." And the quiet between them said more than anything else could. The first frost came early that year, silvering the pastures and clinging to the porch railings before sunrise. Willa stood at the edge of the barnyard, arms folded tight against the morning chill, watching her breath rise like smoke. Prescott emerged from the shed with a bucket sloshing warm mash for the heifers, his steps leaving prints on the frozen ground. "Water trough's icing," she said as he approached. "I'll break it after feed in," he answered. "Ought to haul in more wood today, too. Cold set in, and for good." She nodded. eyes drifting to the tree line where fog still clung. I used to dread winter. Too many days trapped inside with nothing but the sound of wind. Prescott set the bucket down. You don't have to feel that here. She hesitated. I want to believe that. You will, he said, not as comfort, but as truth. Inside, the hearth crackled low, throwing pale light across the pine floorboards. Willa knelt beside it, coaxing flame from kindling with practiced hands. She had taken to the house's rhythm slowly but surely, sewing curtains from old flour sacks, oiling the hinges on the pantry door, finding quiet usefulness in corners Prescott hadn't touched in years. That afternoon, they rode west to the ridge above Wild Dog Creek, scouting for downed trees they could cut for firewood. The grass had yellowed to straw, the air sharp with the scent of cedar and snow. Willa wore a man's coat now, sleeves rolled, her hair tucked beneath a knitted cap she'd found in a trunk. Prescott pointed to a fallen cottonwood near the bend. That one'll split well. She dismounted without waiting. I'll mark the trunk if you start the cut. He watched her kneel by the bark, tying a length of red cloth around one limb with sure fingers. You always this steady when work needs doing? I never had time not to be. He nodded, swinging the axe free from its leather loop and setting into the wood. With each strike, the rhythm between them held quiet, efficient, without the need for words. Once the log was notched, they sat on the bluff overlooking the riverbed, passing a tin of jerky between them. The sun had sunk behind the hills, leaving the sky streaked with lavender and gold. Was there ever someone you almost stayed for? She asked, eyes fixed on the horizon. Prescott chewed slowly. No, I kept moving after the war. Got used to silence too much to fill it with someone who didn't understand it. Willa traced a line in the dust with her boot heel. I spent too long with men who wanted me quiet but never listened when I was. I listen. I know. They sat that way until the light dimmed and the air turned bitter. When they returned to the ranch, the first snow had begun to fall, soft and slow like it had all the time in the world. That night, Willa set a pot of beans on the stove while Prescott mended a stirrup strap by lamplight. The quiet between them was no longer strange, only warm. Familiar. You ever think about what this place could be? She asked, her voice low. Prescott looked up. What do you mean? I mean more than cattle and fences. A place where folks can land when they've got nowhere else. Women like me. Kids too. He leaned back, fingers pausing on the leather. You'd want that. I'd want to make something that gives back. That holds people up instead of pushing them out. He studied her for a long moment, then stood, crossed to where she stood by the stove. His hands were rough and warm when they found hers. You've already made this place more than it was. She didn't look away. I don't know if I'm strong enough to build all that. You don't have to do it alone. Her breath hitched, just once. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She reached up, brushed a fleck of snow from his collar. Neither am I. Later, when the oil lamp burned low and the house settled into its creaks and sighs, Prescott opened the cedar trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out a folded quilt stitched decades ago by a mother long gone. He carried it to Willa's room and stood in the doorway. She was already beneath the covers, eyes half-lidded but not yet asleep. He didn't speak, just laid the quilt over her gently. Her hand found his wrist, held it firm. You could stay, she whispered. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he set his weight beside her, slow and certain, and her head came to rest against his chest, heart to heart. Outside, snow whispered against the windows. Inside, the quiet finally felt like home. The first calf dropped just after sunset. Prescott had seen the signs earlier, a heifer pacing the fence line, shifting her weight, tail twitching with unease. By the time he lit the lantern and stepped into the corral, Willa was already there, sleeves rolled, hands braced on her knees as she watched the labor begin. She picked a cold night, she said, not looking away. Always do, Prescott muttered, passing her the lantern. Hold that steady. The birth was quick but rough. The calf slid into the straw slick and shivering, its mother turning to lick it clean. Willa crouched beside the new life, her face unreadable in the flickering light. Strong little thing, she said. Took its first breath like it meant it. Prescott rested his hands on the top rail. You see a lot of births in that place you came from? She shook her head. Mostly endings. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. They walked back in silence, boots crunching frost. Inside, the stove had kept the kitchen warm. Willa tugged off her gloves and hung them by the door, then turned toward the window and watched the night settle around the hills. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Prescott folded his coat over the chair. Used to. Thought maybe I'd try California. Or further south. But every time I looked past these ridges, didn't see anything I needed. She crossed to the cupboard and pulled down the old tin box where she kept her sewing. I wonder what I'd be if I'd been born somewhere else. Or to someone different. He leaned against the table. You'd still be you. Just carrying different scars. She threaded a needle without replying. Her fingers moved with quiet precision, patching the frayed hem of a work shirt. There's a family riding in from Miles City tomorrow, he said after a pause. Homesteaders. Looking for grazing land. I told them they could bunk in the lower barn for a few days, till the oldest boy gets strong enough to travel again. Willa nodded once. What do they need? Warm food. Rest. A little help fixing their wagon. Beyond that, just kindness. I can do that. He watched her a moment longer. I know. The next morning brought a brittle wind and pale skies. Willa split kindling with practice strokes while Prescott hitched the team to the dray sled. By mid-morning, the family arrived, 2 children wrapped in threadbare coats, a mother with wind-chapped hands, and a father whose limp told of old injury, not recent trouble. Willa met the mother at the barn door, handed her a pail of warm water, and guided the children toward the kitchen. You'll sleep warm tonight, she said, voice even but soft. That evening, after the guests had settled, Prescott found Willa sitting beneath the eaves, sharpening a paring knife with a whetstone. Never seen you take to strangers like that, he said. They looked like Eli and my mother. Just worn down to nothing. He sat beside her, the porch creaking under their weight. You want to keep doing that? Helping folks passing through? I think I do. Not out of guilt. Just feels right. He nodded slowly. Then we'll make it part of the place. Willa turned the knife once more, listened to the scrape of stone on steel. You ever think about building more rooms? Not just for us. For others. A bunkhouse, maybe. I have the timber, he said. Just needed the reason. She set the knife down. Well, you've got one now. He reached over, took her hand without asking. Her fingers curled into his like they'd always belonged there. That night in the church, she said, quiet now. I didn't think I'd ever be anything more than what that man left behind. I didn't see something left behind, Prescott said. I saw someone still standing. She leaned into him, head against his shoulder. I want to build something with you. Something that stays. He wrapped his arm around her, steady and sure. Then we will. The lanterns in the barn flickered in the wind, but the house behind them glowed steady. And for the first time in a long time, Willa felt the world wasn't holding its breath, waiting to take something away. It was giving slow and quiet, but certain. The frame of the bunkhouse rose slow and true, board by board beneath the weight of early winter. Prescott adjusted the collar of his wool coat and stepped back to gauge the angle of the rafters as Willa handed up another length of pine. Her gloves were stiff with dried sap, her cheeks wind-reddened, but her smile was steady, the kind that came from building something that would outlast the cold. The family from Miles City had moved on a week earlier, their wagon patched, the boy strong enough to ride upright again. They'd left behind a woven basket of dried apples and a letter scratched in careful ink, thanks for warmth, for patience, for a place to breathe a few nights without fear. Willa had tucked it into the drawer with the rest of the odds and ends she couldn't throw away just yet. Prescott set his hammer on the sawhorse and wiped his brow with a kerchief. When we finish the roof, I'd like to run a stovepipe through the west wall. Keep the bunkroom warm without choking it with smoke. Willa nodded, then glanced toward the far ridge. We could lay out a garden along the south slope. Come spring, it'll catch the sun longer. He followed her gaze. You thinking beans or squash? Both. And onions. Maybe corn. He smiled and reached for her hand, rough palm curling around hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's a fine thought. That night, they sat in the kitchen with the fire burning low and the wind curling at the corners of the windows. Prescott leaned over the table, sketching measurements on a scrap of paper while Willa read through a seed catalog she bartered off a traveling merchant. Her hair had grown longer, darker at the roots, and curled slightly near her neck where it stayed damp after washing. Did you ever think your life would look like this? She asked, not looking up. Not once, he said. But I'd never traded. She folded the catalog closed and walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. I've been thinking about taking your name. He stood, slowly. You sure? I'm sure I want to belong to something that means more than surviving. I want to belong here. With you. He crossed the room quietly, then rested his hands on her shoulders. Then let's make it so. We'll speak to the circuit preacher next time he comes through. And if he doesn't arrive before spring, I'll marry you myself, right here under the cottonwoods. She turned in his arms, her voice low. I like that. They went on a clear afternoon with frost in the grass and a sky the color of polished slate. The preacher was a stoop-shouldered man with kind eyes, traveling with a mule and a saddlebag full of tattered hymnals. He stood between them beneath the old elm near the paddock, reading from a pocket Bible while two neighbors looked on as witnesses. Willa wore a dress she'd stitched from cream muslin, and Prescott had trimmed his beard down close, his suit pressed and brushed. When the vows were done, and she placed her hand in his, there was no applause, no music. Only the sound of wind through dry leaves and the hush of something deeper than joy, something rooted. That night, he carried her over the threshold not as a gesture, but because she laughed and dared him to. They shared a stew she'd made earlier and a small tin of wild plum preserves gifted by the neighbor woman. Later, beneath the quilt stitched with her own hands, Willa lay with her cheek against Prescott's chest, his arm around her waist, their legs tangled together beneath the linen. I want to grow old here, she whispered. You will, he said. We both will. Years passed, marked not by clocks but by seasons. The bunkhouse became a refuge for travelers and lost souls alike, women escaping silence, children needing warmth, men with worn boots and nowhere else to go. Willa kept the books, tended the garden, and taught anyone who wanted to learn how to read, how to sew, how to stand tall. Prescott built a second barn, then a smokehouse. He taught the boys who passed through how to handle a horse, how to respect the land, how to fix what was broken instead of discarding it. Their home never grew grand, but it grew full. On their 10th winter together, Willa sat by the hearth with a letter in her lap and her hand resting on her belly. She'd written to her cousin in Missouri, distant kin she hadn't spoken to in 20 years, and had received word that Eli's grave had been tended all this time. Prescott knelt beside her and rested his head against her side. He'd be proud of you. She ran her fingers through his hair, silver now at the temples. He'd like you. I'd have liked him. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and certain. And inside their house, built not just of timber and stone, but of healing and hope, there was warmth enough to last through every season still to come. They had once come to this place carrying only what they could bear. Now, they carried each other. And that was everything.